WLRN edition 120 in 3, 2, 1.
I was born woman, off my knees I will stand for my liberation. Sisters, rise again. I was born woman, off my knees I will stand for my liberation. Rise and rise again.
Greetings and welcome to the 120th edition podcast of Women's Liberation Radio News for this Thursday, April 2nd, 2026. This is Cat Bradfield, newsreader, songwriter, and Southern Hemisphere correspondent for WLRN. This month's edition focuses on technology and feminism. We'll hear excerpts from two papers presented at the International Women's Day conference held last month by Australian Feminists for Women's Rights, with a talk on social media from feminist and poet Andy Hugard, and another on artificial intelligence from Susan Hawthorne, writer, editor, and co-founder of Spinifex Press. We'll also hear commentary from WLRN's Lola Bessis about this topic. Also, before we get started, I wanted to remind listeners of WLRN's 10-year anniversary coming up next month and encourage you all to go to WLRNmedia.com and click on the picture of Dolly Parton to help us celebrate. It's easy. All you have to do is click on Dolly's pic, read the instructions, and fill out the form with your top 10 songs by women. Songs can be from any genre, any language, and any year. You can pick your songs based on popularity, on feminist themes, you can pick songs you want more women to know about, or you can just pick 10 songs that you're vibing with right now. When summer comes, I'll count up the votes and then count down the top 100 songs as voted by you right here on WLRN. The team at WLRN produces a monthly radio broadcast to break the sound barrier women are blocked by under the status quo rule of men. This blocking of women's discourse we see in all sectors of society, be they conservative, liberal, mainstream, progressive, or radical. The thread that runs through all of American politics, except for separatist feminism, is male dominance and entitlement in all spheres. To start off today's edition, here's women's news from around the globe for this Thursday, April 2nd, 2026. On March 18th, an investigation published by the New York Times revealed that United Farm Workers co-founder and Latino civil rights leader Cesar Chavez had groomed and sexually abused women and girls in the labor movement. The findings are based on more than 60 interviews with victims and acquaintances of Chavez, as well as union records, emails, photographs, and recordings from United Farm Workers board meetings. Many women had said they were previously discouraged from speaking out to preserve Chavez's public image. The publication of the allegations caused organisations to distance themselves from Chavez, with United Farm Workers cancelling annual celebrations honouring its co-founder. On March 26th, California Governor Gavin Newsom signed legislation to change the name of the holiday celebrated on March 31st, previously named after Mr. Chavez, to Farm Workers' Day. A new study published on March 18th has found that women who undergo premature menopause have a 40% higher risk of heart attack. Those who undergo menopause before the age of 40 were found to have a higher lifelong risk of both fatal and non-fatal heart attacks compared to women who experience menopause after 40. The average age at which women experience menopause is 51 to 52 years. Whilst previous research has identified a link between age of menopause and cardiovascular risk, this study also accounted for racial differences, including 3,500 black women as well as 6,500 white women. Black women were found to be 3 times as likely to experience premature menopause at 15%, compared to white women at 5%. Both findings were significantly higher than the expected frequency of 1%. This paper reinforces the need for doctors to consider reproductive history and age of menopause when assessing a female patient's cardiovascular risk. On March 2nd, Iraqi feminist and women's rights advocate Yanar Mohammed was killed outside her home in Baghdad. Ms. Mohammed had established a network of safe houses for abused women and Yazidi victims of Islamic State sexual violence, and she was the co-founder of the Organization of Women's Freedom in Iraq. Her network originally consisted of 10 safe houses, but that number has now decreased to 6 due to ongoing persecution. One of her colleagues said that Ms. Mohammed had been subjected to constant threats of violence. Both Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have called on the Iraqi government to investigate her murder, calling it a calculated assault to stifle human rights defenders. It is suspected that Ms. Mohammed's murder, along with other recent murders of rights activists in Iraq, was organised by members of a paramilitary group associated with both the Iraqi and Iranian governments. The government starts with smear campaigns, then court cases, to stop you from doing your human rights work, Ms. Mohammed had said in an interview for the Nobel Women's Initiative. And if that doesn't work, they kidnap and kill you. On March 19th, FIFA agreed to introduce new regulations requiring women's football teams to have at least 2 female staff members on the bench, with one being either the head coach or the assistant coach. Only 12 of 32 coaches at the 2023 FIFA Women's World Cup were female. FIFA's chief football officer Jill Ellis said in a press conference about the rule change that there are simply not enough women in coaching today. We must do more to accelerate change by creating clearer pathways, expanding opportunities, and increasing the visibility for women on our sidelines. The new rule comes into effect immediately and covers both national teams and club-level competition. If a team is unable to meet the requirements for financial reasons, it is expected that FIFA will step in to assist. 15 men have been arrested in Nigeria after allegations of sexual assault at the Aludo Fertility Festival in Ozoro in the southern Delta state. Videos filmed at the festival and circulated online show young men openly attacking women. These videos sparked widespread anger and led to the hashtag #StopRapingWomen to trend on social media. Delta State Police have rejected claims that the event was a rape festival. However, some witnesses say that women were warned to not go outside during parts of the festival. This has raised concern that the sexual violence may have been planned and carried out under the excuse of tradition. One of the men arrested was a community leader who is credited with being one of the event organisers. Nigeria's First Lady, Olurimi Tinubu, has condemned the alleged assaults and issued a statement that no culture justified violating women and girls. She also praised police for the arrests and encouraged victims to seek medical and psychological support. On March 16th, a senior government official in Zambia disclosed that some political parties were asking prospective female candidates for sexual favours in exchange for selection. The whistleblower did not name the parties accused of extorting candidates, but advised all affected women to keep records of the requests. The Zambian government currently has a significant sex imbalance, with only 15% of MPs being female. The country's president stated last year that this underrepresentation reflects deep-rooted cultural and structural barriers. Zambia's general election will take place on August 13th this year. In March 2026, Girl Guiding UK announced that all biologically male members will have to leave the organisation by September 6th this year. The organisation announced in December last year that they would no longer permit boys to join, however did not issue any specific guidance on current male members until this month. The decision has been labelled heartbreaking by trans activist groups and the right thing to do by women's rights advocates. This rule change was not implemented out of a desire to protect women, but rather to allow Girl Guiding to retain charity status following last year's Supreme Court ruling on the definition of woman in UK equality law. The Italian Competition Authority is currently investigating cosmetic brands Sephora and Benefit Cosmetics over links to mental health issues affecting young girls. The companies have been accused of using covert marketing techniques to sell their products to girls aged 10 and under, allegedly fueling an unhealthy obsession with skincare known as cosmeticorexia. Both brands are owned by French luxury group LVMH and have adopted the marketing technique of using very young micro-influencers to encourage young girls to purchase cosmetics. Platforms such as TikTok and Instagram have seen significant rise in young girls talking about skincare and makeup. The trend has drawn criticism from dermatologists who argue that children do not need beauty products, and this focus on skincare can instead create anxiety around appearance. The investigations were opened over concerns that these cosmetic products did not have adequate warnings and precautions advising against use by minors and warning of potential health impacts. The companies agreed to fully cooperate with authorities, but declined further comment. On March 13th, India's top court rejected a petition calling for a national menstrual leave policy. The judges argued that mandatory leave would not benefit women and would instead reinforce stereotypes and affect employability, saying that if these laws were introduced, then no one would hire women. The lawyer who filed the petition had hoped that working women would be awarded 2 to 3 days of leave per month to account for menstrual difficulties. Another lawyer said that the judge's decision would only reiterate the taboo around menstruation and rights that we have failed to address. She claimed that denying menstrual leave violates the principles of workplace dignity, gender equality, and safe working conditions, as it forces women into uncomfortable, undignified, or hazardous work environments. Campaigners in favour of menstrual leave also pointed out that such policies had already been implemented in Spain, Japan, Indonesia and South Korea, and studies in these countries have shown that the time off can be beneficial to women. Some companies and states within India have also implemented their own menstrual leave policies, despite the lack of national regulation. In March 2026, more than 250 prominent German women campaigned for the government to make pornographic deepfakes a criminal offence. The call was sparked by TV star Colleen Fernandez filing a legal complaint in Spain against her former husband for sharing fake sexualised images of her online. The ex-husband is allegedly pursuing legal action against German news outlet Der Spiegel, which reported on the case. In an interview with another German broadcaster, Fernandez said she wanted to highlight the gaps in the law, and claimed that Germany was currently an absolute haven for perpetrators. She also explained that she had taken the legal action in Spain, where she previously lived with the defendant, because women's rights are significantly better there than in Germany. She added that this applied not only to online abuse, but also to domestic violence. Changes that German women are calling for include making every sexual act without explicit consent a criminal offence, as well as adding the offence of femicide to the penal code. Germany's Justice Minister Stephanie Hubig has announced plans for a draft bill targeting sexualised deepfakes, and noted that it was a debate that affects society as a whole, not just women. A recent study undertaken in Germany found that 60% of 16 to 17-year-old girls and 33% of boys in the same age range have been victims of digital violence in the last 5 years. On March 22nd, several thousand people held a demonstration against sexualised digital violence in Berlin. Fernandez herself did not attend, but a statement written by her was read out by supporters at the Brandenburg Gate, calling for the walls of silence to be torn down. On March 26th, the International Olympic Committee released its new eligibility rules for the women's category, restricting eligibility to biologically female athletes only, and requiring a one-time genetic test to confirm eligibility. The test will be in the form of a saliva test, cheek swab or blood sample, and will test for presence or absence of the sex-determining SRY gene. The IOC statement explained that this gene represents highly accurate evidence that an athlete has experienced male sex development. The new policy comes after an 18-month consultation period and will come into effect for the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles. It represents a sharp turnaround from guidelines issued by the IOC in 2021, which left eligibility rules in the hands of individual sporting federations. When IOC President Kirsty Coventry took on the role last year, she announced that the IOC would now take the lead for a uniform approach to protect the female category. The new rules have no retroactive power and cannot strip male athletes of medals they have been unfairly awarded in the past. They also have no bearing on professional sport at the grassroots or national level. That concludes WLRN's World News segment for this Thursday, April 2nd. I'm Cat Bradfield. Share your news stories, announcements and tips with us by emailing info@wlrnmedia.com and letting us know what's going on.
You are listening to WLRN, brought to you by the totally excellent radical feminists at Women's Liberation Radio News.
They deny that we're oppressed on the basis of our sex. You know less than some fetishists who puts on a dress, we get arrested just because we dare to tell how it is. I need to talk this through, but now I'm scared to get a therapist. If the mainstream left or right, no one gives a damn about this. Why the hell do they keep telling us to cease and desist? You say that you don't vibe with gender roles and you don't have a gendered soul. You and me have common goals, cause that's the point of gender abolition. Now I ain't going back into the kitchen till I'm serving up the patriarchy's head upon a plate. They said the sexes aren't so different, but when arguing on Twitter, it sure seems to me that they can see which side needs threats of rape. They've got deep fakes of J.K. Rowling and deep fakes of Moy redeeming. If it's trolling, why is it only women's faces that I'm seeing? Where's the bound and gagged Matt Walsh? Where's the naked Elon Musk? Where's the artificial sex tape of that fascist Donald Trump? Yeah, they cancelled Graham Linehan. We won't be seeing him again, but he's not getting threatened with a sexual assault. Every time I go outside wearing shirts purchased from the men's, get asked my pronouns like somehow my clothes can alternate my and protest without signs. Spell out men cannot be lesbians. The other side are shouting things like death to legal feminists. And I can't go to any march for any left-wing cause, cause every single grassroots movement has been captured in their cause. Rallies for Gaza, for the climate, for dismantling of ICE have always gotta have some fucker waving blue and pink and white. Everyone but Pauline Hanson's always dancing around the signs. Putting men in women's prisons should have always been a crime. And all the mainstream rights got left is that they give a damn about this. They'll get the vote, we'll get the boot, and they'll make us cease and desist. We may be allies of a sort in terms of saving women's sport, but if we use our voice to be pro-choice, it's cease and desist. They deny that we're oppressed on the basis of our sex. In adolescence, some fetishist who puts on a dress, we get arrested just because we dare to tell it how it is. I need to talk this through, but now I'm scared to get a therapist. Men do all the shit and get a slap on the wrist, but when women do speak up, we've gotta cease and desist. So fuck 'em all, we will speak up, we will not cease and desist.
That was our very own Cat Bradfield, with her song Cease and Desist, written for the International Women's Day Conference held by Australian Feminists for Women's Rights last month. Next up, we'll hear excerpts from the conference. The conference included presentations on a range of issues, including war, surrogacy, spirituality, and the legal rights of lesbians. The clips you'll hear next are from a panel on technology and feminism, with Hugard speaking on social media and Susan Hawthorne speaking on artificial intelligence.
Anne was born towards the end of World War II. She was an early adapter to the women's liberation movement in the early 70s after witnessing her mother's struggles. She has had a varied work history as a teacher in alternative settings like Fairley Women's Prison and as a restaurateur in Clifton Hill, Victoria and Hobart. More recently, she settled in Castlemaine and Chewton, Central Victoria, where she writes poetry and watches kangaroos.
Thank you, Felicity. I'm concentrating on misogyny and the internet, particularly looking at social media. The web is too much with us, late and soon, browsing and scrolling, they waste our powers. It's a misquote from William Wordsworth, but apt in this situation. And to extend the metaphor of the web, there's also a large amount of spinning and weaving by numerous spiders in order to catch unsuspecting prey. And once trapped, prey held and only the brave can escape. Spiders I'm referring to are the present owners and companies running social media. Their power is enormous, as is the wealth they generate daily. When Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web in 1989, he envisaged a beneficial tool that could be universally used and, importantly, it would be free. As the desire for profit began to drive the internet, Berners-Lee became pessimistic. In fact, he's used the word devastated to describe his response. Where would we be without the internet, and more specifically, without social media? To start, ironically, we wouldn't all be here. Social media has provided the means to meet and link up with like-minded people, to form message groups, to share information and organise real-life events. There are women here today who I wouldn't have got to know without using social media. In my case, Facebook and X, formerly known as Twitter. Sarah Williams, in her fascinating book, Careless People, a cautionary tale of power, greed and lost idealism, has written about her experience working for Facebook. She approached the organisation begging for a job in 2009, when it was still possible to be optimistic, in her words, about Facebook in those innocent days when it still was possible to be hopeful about the internet. That was about the time when I joined Facebook. I'd been living in Castlemaine in central Victoria and discovered a local Facebook group in 2010, aptly named Castlemania. The group had been established initially as a sort of notice board, informing members about what was happening about town. Over the years, it had morphed into a quasi-discussion group, and there were the usual arguments and debates between various factions in the town. One of the chief discussions revolved around a group of women wanting to run a women-only Reclaim the Night event, with a typical pushback from men. As a consequence, a specific feminist Facebook group was formed. Only women could join. In time, it became obvious that the women running the group were liberal feminists, supporters of sex work, and came forward. Any discussions around trans issues were not permitted. So a friend and I started another Facebook group and named it Not the Third Wave. We didn't limit it to Castlemaine residents and had women from different states and from the UK join us. Our emphasis was on gender-critical issues, although other broad feminist topics were discussed, and it was a way of meeting many more like-minded women. Through various Facebook groups and message groups, I've made many friends, close and far away. I've met many of these friends in real life, helped organise picnics and lunches, seducing women, and copped abuse at RWD rallies. And through Facebook, I've become acquainted with people sharing many other interests: history, literature, podcasts, movies, TV shows, and poetry. But I've also witnessed the amount of misogyny directed at women and girls in general, and occasionally me. And I've also learnt who to avoid in my town. Other negatives associated with my usage of social media include the time wasted on scrolling when I could have been doing many more useful things, and the money wasted on shopping. However, I've got off lightly compared with so many other people, especially elderly women who have been scammed romantically and financially, and teenage girls as well. The addictive nature of social media is well researched. Algorithms and tools such as emojis have been designed to ensure that the user remains hooked. And there's that dopamine hit when someone responds to a post in a positive way. Then from a negative perspective, the car crash effect. The user's unable to look away. If it bleeds, it bleeds. Tabloid newspapers know this well. Cory Doctorow, in his excellent book, Enshittification, posits that one reason people refuse to leave X is often the same reason they join the platform, i.e. to find a community of like-minded people. But then they go down the rabbit hole. So despite the totally unethical and at times downright manipulative tactics of Elon Musk, they remain. There's an increasing number of young children and teenagers who are bullied online by friends and strangers, occasionally tragically leading to suicide. Girls are attacked for not conforming to certain standards, e.g. body shape and size, physical features including disabilities, and increasingly showing symptoms of autism. In short, the male gaze sets the standard, and girls and women are too fat, too ugly, or retarded, are excluded and or subject to harassment, trolling, or bullying. When I say retarded, that's a word that is used regularly now. And sadly, the bullying is often from other girls and women. The definition of a troll, not the quaint mythical creature who lives under bridges, is a person who intentionally stirs up trouble or provokes others online. They typically leave negative or even defamatory comments in order to get a reaction. From what I've witnessed over the last 17 years, the amount of trolling and downright abuse has increased dramatically. Ginger Gorman, there, I've recommended, Troll Hunting Inside the World of Online Hate and its Human Fallout, talks about how the internet bleeds into real life. And this situation was discussed in a discussion yesterday. There's a superb irony for us in her story of online abuse. As an ABC presenter in Far North Queensland, she'd taken up the cause of LGBTIQ+ rights and interviewed two gay men in 2010 who'd obtained a baby by a Russian surrogate. She interviewed the men and photographed the child and his two fathers, and it featured on the front page of her Gender Project's ABC webpage. In 2013, she learnt that the two men were paedophiles. Both were given considerable prison sentences. As a consequence, Gorman received numerous anonymous abusive tweets, including one that said chillingly, "Your life is over." She writes about Charlotte Dawson, a former model and TV personality, who'd been a target of tweets using the hashtag #DieCharlotte. One tweet tells her to go hang herself, another to put her face into a toaster. Confronted with a constant barrage of hate, she overdosed, was discovered in time and taken to hospital. But tragically, 2 years later, she was found dead in her home. I strongly recommend Gorman's book as a thorough investigation of online misogyny, despite what her views might be about transgender issues. Over the years, there have been huge changes in various platforms. However, when we remember Zuckerberg's Face Match, a hot or not site was the prototype for Facebook, it's easy to understand how the platform has been careless and or responsible in its oversight of abusive posts or groups designed to build misogynistic. And I don't know if any of you remember, but I certainly do, the Hotties of Melbourne University group that was started on Facebook, and various Facebook groups initiated by public school boys in order to rape young women or teenage girls. And as for Twitter and Instagram, TikTok and other social media platforms, they aren't any better when it comes to oversight. Indeed, the abuse in many forms has ramped up exponentially. Not uncoincidentally, over the years, these sites have become huge money generators, relying on algorithms. On the 23rd of February, The Guardian published an opinion piece by an anonymous 15-year-old girl. Anonymous for obvious reasons. She talks about spending a fair amount of her time on social media, scrolling through short videos on Instagram or TikTok, saying all her friends use the apps. A direct quote from her. A few years ago, I saw an Instagram reel of a young woman talking about how she'd been raped 6 years ago, struggled with the thoughts of suicide afterwards, but managed to rebuild her life again. Among the comments, the majority of which were from men, were things like, "Well, at least you had some." "No way, she's unrapeable." "Hope you didn't talk this much when it happened." "Bro could have picked a better option." The 15-year-old girl continues, "Using social media has ruined my self-esteem and my relation to being a girl in this world. The misogyny I see from boys my age online, which is echoed in real life too, has made me feel resentful and bitter towards them. I understand that boys are victims of harmful content as well. They're growing up learning how to do this from the adults who post misogynistic videos first. A ban might not fix the problem, but it would help. If society can't stop it, it can at least show it disapproves. 2 weeks ago, there was a landmark trial that began in Los Angeles. It's a lawsuit alleging Instagram. Meta now is a company responsible for Instagram and Facebook and I'm not quite sure what other. What's that? Yeah. And Google's YouTube substantially contributed to the mental health problems that are now, this is the lawsuit alleging, the health problems of a now 20-year-old California woman through the intentionally addictive nature of the platforms. As a possible consequence of this ongoing trial, Insta announced last week that it will start alerting parents if their children repeatedly search for terms associated with self-harm or suicide. But note this quote from Meta in a blog post. Our goal is to empower parents to step in if their teens' searches suggest they may need support. We also want to avoid sending these notifications unnecessarily, which if done too much could make the notifications less useful overall. Sarah Wynne Williams, in her book Careless People, which is about her experience on Facebook, she says parents at work, and this is really telling, talk about how they don't allow their teens to have mobile phones. Surely underscores how well these executives understand the real damage their product inflicts on young minds. I'll end. There's a bit more. I'll end with a quote from a book written by Adele Zainab Walton, where she talks about the suicide of her young sister after using social media. In her book, Logging Off, she discusses the tragic suicide of her sister after support and advice from a group on the dark web. We can no longer sleepwalk into a future where the digital world becomes an unstoppable force, where its harms are accepted as normal, where its leaders are untouchable rulers, and where our lives are simply resources to be extracted, manipulated, and profited from.
I'm now very pleased to also introduce Susan Hawthorne, who writes about lesbians whenever she can in fiction, poetry and fiction. Her recent books include Lesbian, Politics, Culture, Existence, Vortex, The Crisis of Patriarchy, and Dark Matters, a novel. She became interested in intellectual property when she was writing her PhD on wild politics, feminism, globalisation and biodiversity in the late 1990s, and wrote about it also in her book, Bibliodiversity, a manifesto for independent publishing, now translated into 8 languages. Since 2023, she's been warning writers and publishers to be wary about AI. She's written submissions to government, the UN, and spoken about AI at publishing conferences. Thank you very much, Susan.
Thank you. In addition to acknowledging the Indigenous owners of the land, I'd also like to acknowledge the many women throughout history who have fought for women's freedom and the freedom of lesbians, often at the cost of their lives. This is a paper that's in 10 sections, so I'm going to say 1, 2, 3. So 1, AI has become normal and normalised. As a feminist publisher and writer, I am disturbed at the theft of original work by writers. In March 2025, I discovered that 13 of my books had been illegally pirated, as well as 15 articles and some of my poems. It represents a significant percentage of my work carried out over 50 years. When The Atlantic published this list, we found that 145 Spinifex titles had been copied. That's about half Spinifex list. It represents 34 years' work by 5 Spinifex staff, 2 freelancers, as well as Renata and I. It affects 85 book authors and around 1,000 contributors to anthologies. It is theft. If I left my car on the street and it was stolen, that would be called theft. Even if it was unlocked, it is still theft. This is what the big tech companies are doing with their text and data mining, TDM, and large language models, LLMs. It is a major threat to feminist writers and publishers. Creativity cannot be produced by machines. No matter how many poets and novelists and artists they ingest and generate, they always get it wrong because it is missing the language developed collectively through embodied real-life experience. AI flattens out the spirit of the writer. There is currently no enforceable laws, but there are some lawsuits in train. As a feminist, I am horrified at the way in which further pornification of society is being globalised. The increasing pornification of women through AI seems like it might be someone else's problem. Digital undressing has come to Australia, indeed, to Spinifex. Caitlin Roper, author of Sex Dolls, Robots and Woman Hating, was digitally undressed on Elon Musk's platform X, fueled by Grok's image feature. She was interviewed in the West Australian and she said, Grok is facilitating men's sexual crimes against women and girls. It's allowing these men and boys to sexually exploit women and girls at a scale never seen before. It's so easy. End of quote. Caitlin also works as social media expert for Spinifex and for Collective Shout. The same has happened to the founder of Collective Shout, Melinda Tankard-Rees. She says of Grok's image feature, it is not a glitch. The AI generator has been trained to behave this way. End quote. She's also said Grok is one more digital weapon of abuse to degrade, debase, frighten, humiliate and intimidate women. Melinda wants a global ban on all nudifying generators. In the meantime, millions of women are being stripped bare for the pleasure or revenge of men. Melinda has published many books on pornography, sexualisation, prostitution, surrogacy and violence against women with Spinifex. 3. As a radical feminist and long-term writer on ecology, I am more than concerned about the excessive use of water and other resources for data centres. There are 314 data centres in Australia. That shocked me. Most of which are located near Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Canberra and other capital and regional cities. Amazon and Microsoft are the 2 biggest players at the moment. So why so many? It's called by the government growing the digital economy. In the US, Elon Musk's XAI has used the methane gas turbines to power data centres in Tennessee close to black neighbourhoods, pumping nitrogen oxides into the air which are known to cause cancer, asthma and upper respiratory diseases. It is beyond belief to me that Australia, a continent with major water shortage issues, is set up to build so many data centres. Vast amounts of water are used to cool the computer systems to prevent damage to chips. A significant amount of the water will be discharged to local wastewater facilities, overwhelming local water systems. 80% of the water will evaporate. Billions of litres of water are being consumed each year, and this will go up and up. and one wonders for how long. As a feminist with deep political concerns about Indigenous rights, I am irate at the wholesale breaking of community-based and traditional intellectual property rights. So I'm just going to give you a brief rundown on what they are. Trade-related intellectual property rights, that's TRIPS. We are experiencing a rerun of the way in which the US and large corporations have treated TRIPS. TRIPS means that the US patent laws are internationalised so that the laws applied worldwide. That is colonisation. And since US patent laws and copyright laws are much broader, as in the case of Senator Payman, it opens the way to greater exploitation of the intellectual resources through, for example, fair use provisions. This is effectively an infringement of national sovereignty. It protects not the labour and knowledge of ordinary people, but the property of transnational corporations. The asymmetry between resources and capital is a long-standing one, and its origins go back to the earliest days of capitalism. As with earlier colonial relationships, the push is towards homogenisation across cultures and penetration of the new environment by dominant culture values. Corporate penetration is threatening intellectual and creative pluralism. The move in all these agreements is towards a false universalisation of laws applying to trade. Corporations, thus, have only one set of laws to negotiate. This intention would be laudable if the context were fair and equitable. But given the inequalities of power, the policy is effectively the imposition of a trade monoculture. It amounts to the colonisation of individual resources, books and other creative materials by large corporations, freely taking what is not theirs to take. Traditional resource rights, TRRs, and community intellectual rights, CIRs. A further concern I have is that the theft of Indigenous creative and intellectual works, international trade relations should include a focus on TRRs. These are relevant to the intellectual property rights of Indigenous peoples. TRRs take more account of tangible and intangible resources, which are held collectively by Indigenous peoples and communities with a strong traditional heritage. AI is cultural imposition of global capitalism on Indigenous peoples, including their knowledge of biodiversity, medicinal plants, land patterns, all contained in memory. There is a new declaration from Algiers about putting forward memory as a terrain of political contestation. Very interesting. The biggest hurdle to grassroots protection through the TRRs is the irresponsibility of the dominant colonial culture. Part of the difficulty is that they are intended to protect the Western desired products and knowledge from exploitation. Women face similar dilemmas in the construction of laws intended to protect them from violence. The widespread distribution of pornography and deep fakes is a threat to the safety of women and children of both sexes. In the instance of TRRs, the goal is protection from intellectual violence and cultural colonisation and appropriation. As a publisher wanting to protect the intellectual property rights of Indigenous authors published by Spinifex, we feel a responsibility to do whatever we can to do this. Some of our books include material that is owned by a particular Indigenous community. This too is under threat by Meta, LibGen and others such as Anthropic. From the discussions I have heard on the media, tech companies seem to have no idea about any of these rights and the crimes they are perpetrating against ordinary citizens. 5. As a lesbian, the hefty weight of a mainstream heterosexual and patriarchal-centred universe is growing at an increasing rate. AI is neither intelligent nor sentient. It is more like a sponge of the most popular and pervasive norms in a society, given that the contemporary trans-saturated view of lesbians is so distorted, it is not possible for there to be, say, a lesbian-centric perspective. Lesbians these days, they say, range from butch and femme stereotypes to queers and non-binaries, to lesbians with lady dicks, that is, men. But are the lesbians in this room represented? I don't think so. Since the early 60s, late 60s, early 70s, lesbians have been engaged in creating both culture and politics that speaks to lesbian experience. But what I see in the mainstream is only LGBTQI+, or queer and gay. Despite heading the acronym, lesbians have all but disappeared in public discourse. So what will AI reflect? Lesbians are like any other cultural minority whose ideas, theories, arts and experience will be overlooked yet again. I'm appalled at the way in which racism is embedded within the system. And here I'm talking about the facial recognition systems. As a reflection of the mainstream, racism is embedded into the AI system, just as misogyny is. In the US, facial recognition has resulted in black men being wrongly arrested, and that is in the US. Imagine the escalation of errors for people from societies whose images and cultures are not represented. And I'm not suggesting that expanding AI is a good idea, simply pointing out the embedded problem. AI arises from a history of measuring intelligence. Now, we know the problems there are about IQ testing. As Emily Bender and Alex Hanna in their book, The AI Con, write, AI is inherently racist and ableist to its core. It is, of course, also classist, sexist and lesbian erasing. AI is also colonising and libertarian in its approach, the opposite of what feminists have been fighting for over the last 5 decades. It is not accidental that AI is racist, sexist and all the other isms, because they are structured into the way that AI operates. In a number of African countries, workers are hired to scan AI to check on whether the material can be made public. They are called data janitors. The problem is that these workers are exposed to a lot of material that is traumatic. They are paid a pittance because they live in countries like Kenya, Nigeria, the Philippines, Pakistan, Venezuela, just to name a few. And they suffer from trauma. Once again, the invisible toil of poor workers is sustaining this industry. The companies call it data labelling. The workers call it modern-day slavery. I am alarmed at the way in which anyone outside the default US European world is exoticized by the Silicon Valley norms. In 1989, I wrote an article called Politics of the Exotic, in which I analysed the way in which writers outside the white Western norm had their work appropriated and exoticised. Some of the writers did well for a short time, just as non-binary and trans writers are fashionable just now. The same appropriative tools are at work with AI. Just as they steal the work of Indigenous peoples, they are in the process of colonising absolutely everything else. Anything missed will be swept up in this AI takes all behemoth. 8. I'm disturbed by the likely spread of trans activist ideology through AI results from badly worded prompts. Any movement that is suddenly popular will be spread more widely. Remember, AI does not think. It simply ingests. I have seen feminists defend AI because it can save time. It can summarise a position, providing that position has been accurately articulated. It cannot participate in a debate because that takes on-the-spot thinking, just as developing a theory or writing a novel takes thinking. I can see how attractive this is for students with a deadline, but unless you learn to think for yourself, not just shout slogans, your brain won't really develop. I'm very pleased I had a few years at university to learn to think. Making the time to think is a crucial part of education. Trans activists do not provide great models as thinkers, but rather as opportunists. I am dismayed, 9, by the likely dumber and dumber outcome as the AI universe becomes an echo chamber for capitalist patriarchy and digital colonisation. A loop which repeats and repeats does not create intelligence. Rather, it's a system that increases the power of one section of society, small in number, excessively rich and mostly male, the GFC, and others, and decreases it for the rest. I've written about dominant culture stupidities. This applies to many men. Ask them when they last read a book by a woman. Maybe it was primary school. Maybe it was Enid Blyton. They have a very small data set and make gross generalisations from it. If the greatest number of books, articles, artworks, music are by men and are the most talked about, therefore more large language models are based on them, then it's the same problem as men's stupidity. Able people's stupidity, white people's stupidity, etc. There is a suggestion that AI will get dumber and dumber and create people who will also get dumber and dumber. See above read, learning to think. So, number 10, I can see no reason at all to use AI or promote its use. It is on a level with promoting prostitution. Indeed, it is prostitution. It is colonisation and mass theft, and it has already resulted in deaths. And I forgot to mention at the beginning that I originally had my title as Feminist Arguments Against AI, and then I added why feminists should not promote AI. Thank you.
You are listening to WLRN.
Next, we'll hear from Lola about the intersection of AI and pornography.
There is a moment when you begin to understand pornography through the work of Andrea Dworkin that it becomes impossible to see it as harmless. She insists on something that feels, at first, too obvious to say, that the women on the screen are real, that pornography is not fantasy. It is the filmed evidence of women's subordination. Women who have been coerced, trafficked, beaten, humiliated, and turned into objects for male consumption. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. But what happens now, when the woman on the screen is no longer real? We are meant to be told that AI-generated pornography changes everything. It solves the ethical problem, that if no real woman is involved, then no real harm is done. That finally, pornography can exist without the exploitation. But this is a lie, and more than that, it is a dangerous one. Because what AI pornography reveals is not the disappearance of violence, but its purification and its perfection. Dworkin argued that pornography is not about sex, it's about power. About the eroticization of domination and equality and control. And what AI does is remove the last remaining constraint on that power, the presence of a real woman. Especially when supply does not meet demand. If pornography once required access to women's bodies, AI pornography no longer does. Men no longer need women's consent, or even women's existence. They need only the idea of a woman, infinitely malleable, infinitely submissive, infinitely rapeable. And this is not liberation from exploitation. It is its logical endpoint. Catherine McKinnon, when she was writing alongside Dworkin, argued that pornography is a system, a political practice that constructs women as objects, as things to be used. It doesn't just reflect inequality, it produces it. It teaches it. It trains desire around it. So the real question is not, is the woman real? The question is, what kind of desire is being built? Because the desire is real. The arousal is real. The conditioning is real. And what AI pornography allows is the total expansion of that conditioning beyond any human limit. There is no longer a boundary of what can be produced. No legal risk that matters. No cost, no friction, no woman who can say no. Every fantasy, no matter how violent, degrading, or sadistic, can now be generated instantly, privately, endlessly. This matters because pornography has never been static. It escalates. It builds tolerance. It pushes towards more extreme content over time. And where there was once limits, material, legal, logistical, AI removes them all. What we are looking at is not just more porn. It is a new infrastructure of sexual domination, and it does not stay on the screen. Radical feminists have long argued that pornography is not separate from reality. It organizes it. It shapes how women are seen, how they are treated, and what is considered normal, what is considered desirable. As Sheila Jeffreys has argued, pornography creates a sexual culture in which women's inequality is eroticized and enforced. It is not just representation, it is regulation. AI intensifies this, because now pornography is no longer documenting women's subordination, it is designing it. It becomes a blueprint, a testing ground, a rehearsal space for domination without consequence. And then there's another layer. One that is already happening, and that is perhaps even more insidious. Because AI pornography does not remain confined to fictional women, it uses real women, with women's faces being taken from social media, private accounts, anywhere, and inserted into pornographic images and videos without their knowledge or consent. Women who have never participated in pornography find themselves depicted in acts they never agreed to do, acts they never imagined. This is not fake. This is a violation. It is a form of sexual abuse that no longer requires physical proximity. A form of violation that operates through image, through representation, through the stripping of consent at the most fundamental level, the right to one's own body, one's own likeness, one's own sexual identity and being. Women no longer need to be present to be violated. Their image is enough. What all of this reveals is something that Dworkin understood long before AI existed. That the violence was never in the camera, it was in the desire. Pornography did not create that desire, but it organized it, legitimized it, amplified it. And now, AI has given it a tool with no limits. We are not entering a post-exploitation world. We are entering a world where exploitation is no longer requiring a body, solely a target. And that should be terrifying to us, because there are no constraints, no human resistance, no refusal, and no consequences. What is left is not freedom, it is domination, and it has been perfected. The question we are left with is not whether this is real, it is whether we are willing to confront what it says about the world being built and the kind of power that makes it possible. Because AI pornography does not mark the end of women's subordination, it marks a new phase of it, one which women are no longer necessary except as objects to be endlessly recreated, violated, and consumed. That is not progress. This is the logic of pornography, carried to its final form.
Thanks for listening to WLRN's 120th edition podcast on feminism, AI, and social media. WLRN would like to thank Cat Bradfield for providing us with clips from the IWD Sydney Feminist Conference that took place in Australia last month. Thank you, Cat. If you like what you're hearing and want to support feminist community radio, visit WLRNmedia.com to make a donation or check out our merch. If you're interested in joining the collective, send a letter of interest to info@wlrnmedia.com. We're always looking for women to conduct interviews, write blog posts, help with social media content, and do other tasks that help keep us moving forward. Next, you'll hear from Margaret about this month's podcast cover art. This is Anne Castile, signing off for now.
This is Margaret. To make the image of WLRN Edition 120, I started with images related to computer hardware and wiring that I layered with colors. Then I set up squares somewhat like computer chips. I reused photos of multiple women that I combined in layers over each square. I intended for that imagery to represent people on social media and also AI in the way that AI takes information and reconfigures it. Depending on how much opacity and what mode I assigned each layer, parts of one person or another would predominate, but none of the images were completely any one person. The process felt like the sort of mashup that AI does, mixing things up and recombining, adjusting parameters. Of course, we have to wonder what is being fed into the AI system, the influence of the programmers, the attitudes that may or may not align with our own.
And I'm Lola. Thanks for tuning in. Next month, we will focus our program on the Epstein Files. Our handcrafted podcasts always come out the first Thursday of the month, so look out for it, Thursday, May 7th, our 10th anniversary show. If you'd like to receive our newsletter that notifies you when each podcast, music show, and interviews are released, please sign up for our newsletter at the WLRN WordPress site. Stay strong in the struggle, and thanks for listening.
Working 9 to 5, what a way to make a living.
Hey, don't tune out just yet. We have something exciting coming up at WLRN that we'd like to share. To celebrate 10 years of WLRN, we thought it would be fun to count down the top 100 songs of all time as voted by WLRN listeners and supporters. Want to participate? It's easy. Just go to WLRNmedia.com and click on the photo of Dolly Parton. Tell us your top 10 favorite songs of all time. They can be from any era, genre, or any female artist. Stay tuned over the summer months for the countdown shows.
But how will we find our way out of this? What is the antidote for the patriarchal kiss? How will we find what needs to be shown? And then after that, where is home? Tell me, where is my home? 'Cause gender